anyone who has been in Alberta for any length of time knows that only a few years can go by before the government decides to mess around with its health system again and restructure it. So the big one of those, of course, a little history lesson, is the creation of Alberta Health Services. And that took 9 regional independent health authorities and 3 agencies and combined it into one big centralized super board, Alberta Health Services, right? So the government credits that for reducing duplication of services, for cutting administrative costs, for reducing some competition for funding. The problem is, as Prentice referenced, there has been this feeling in rural Alberta that it's too centralized, that it ignores the voices of local communities. So Mandel, this week, his change to kind of rectify this is to kind of go back to a more decentralized model. Alberta Health Services will still exist, but it's going to have 8 to 10 operational districts within it. Ooh. And I think that language is very carefully chosen, because otherwise it sounds very much, as you like to say, like those old 9 regional health authorities that we had just 7 years ago.
The opposition loves to talk about the fact that the government does like to do this with the health system. It's gone back and forth. Prentice said that this was a pendulum swinging back into balance. But like I said, people are pretty skeptical because it does sound a lot like the old regional boards. So there was a lot of skepticism that I was hearing. And it was also the latest in a sort of good news announcement, a series of good news announcements. And the opposition have been really pointing to the fact that the government seems to have no shortage of good things it can present to Albertans and pat itself on the back for, like this rural health review, which was launched, I guess, last fall, soon after Prentice became premier. So a lot of people are talking about the fact that this all seems pretty curiously timed.
Well, this has nothing to do with health administration. This has all to do with politics. The reason that Ed Stelmach and Ron Leipert blew up the regional health authorities in the first place is that they had become very powerful fiefdoms, and they'd become an opposition within the Tory tent. Each of those health authorities had a very powerful board with a very powerful charismatic leader in many cases, and they were providing real dissent and creating real waves within Torydom. And so when Stelmach blew them up, it was as much as anything to protect his power base. Now, Prentice has the opposite problem. He needs those rural votes back, the ones that went over to the Wild Rose. So this is about a sop to the rural base to try to rebuild the rural base. Will it make any difference for regular folks and the kind of health care they receive? I remain skeptical. But, one of the problems that Keith highlighted in his investigative series into the state of Alberta's hospitals is that we have a lot of duplication of services in rural Alberta. We have a lot of, I don't want to say feather bedding, but we have a lot of hospitals sitting vacant. We have buildings that need repair that we can't afford to repair. What Keith's series demonstrated is that rural communities are very loath to close their own hospitals, even if that makes sense. So decentralizing power and giving decision-making back to rural communities is not necessarily a recipe for better healthcare or a better healthcare system.